So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Michael Kennedy. I work for Developmentor, and today I want to talk to you about building websites from a design as well as a functionality perspective using Bootstrap. And we're going to use this as kind of a case study. We're going to look at a real-world website that we built with Bootstrap and sort of what we decided to include, what we decided to not include, and just sort of how we did things. So we're going to do a little bit of history on what is Bootstrap, and then we're going to go and look at a bunch of different components to Bootstrap and how we're using them in a particular website. And then we'll kind of do some wrap-ups and some demos and stuff like that. Okay. By the way, if you need to email me or find me on Twitter, you can get that information here. All right, so we're going to start out by looking at what does Bootstrap offer web developers. And notice I didn't say web designers, I said web developers, or really any sort of developer that has to build web applications. Now, Bootstrap is helpful and useful for web designers, but those guys have always been pretty good at making websites that look good, that sort of work well, have a lot of cool little tricks, and so on. But web developers have often struggled to have good-looking websites, right? We can easily make them talk to databases, use web services, do AJAX, all these different things. But when it really comes down to, what is the spacing between the letters in the typography, and what is the line height that's just right, and what is the right shadow and color, and all those things, we have not, typically speaking, been very good at that. So what we'll see is that Bootstrap is very, very helpful for sort of raising our starting point from where we're going. Okay, we're going to install and we're going to use Bootstrap. You can see there's going to be at least 3 ways to install and use Bootstrap, one of them quite different than the others. We're going to look at some of the major components and features of Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is not like an all or nothing sort of thing. Bootstrap basically is a bunch of little pieces that you can decide to use or not use throughout your application. And we'll sort of take a tour of many of the more useful features and components of Bootstrap. And then along the way of this tour, we're going to look at how we applied this to our website. Okay, so I suspect that you guys have at least heard of Bootstrap, so you're here to learn more about it, right? But maybe you have experience with it, maybe you don't. Either way, I think this webcast has a lot to offer you. So what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is what we call a web front-end framework, which means it's basically a bunch of CSS with styles and potentially images and things like that in there. Although they have images, they don't really represent them as like PNGs and so on. It's some JavaScript libraries that sort of make things that require some dynamic behaviors that you can't really do with like CSS3, make that possible. So for example, dialogues, things like that. And like I said, a bunch of images, but those images are actually stored as fonts. So on top of this, there's a bunch of sort of design practices built in. They've taken what is sort of the techniques you need to apply to paragraphs to make them more readable, to normalize the browser inconsistencies. So one of the really major challenges of working on websites is I open up my site in Internet Explorer, it looks one way. I open up my site in Chrome, it looks another way. I open it in Firefox, it looks still a different way, right? And these differences come from, not all of them, but many of these differences come from when a browser has to sort of guess at what the default behavior for some part of your site is. So for example, if you put an H1 tag for a heading on your site, and you don't put any styles on it, you don't set margin, width, you don't set the font, and you just let the browser just do what it does. Each one of those browsers has to sort of figure out, well, what is the default font size for an H1? What is the default padding around it, and things like that. So those things can be inconsistencies, and there's there's a really easy way to fix that is if you basically explicitly set every single CSS property of every type that can show up in your HTML. And applying that technique is basically what's called a reset CSS. So we'll see that Bootstrap uses this reset CSS called normalize.css, which does that. So at least these sort of making the browser guess problems go away. There can still be, implementation changes, but a lot of the little weirdnesses can come from that. I see there is a question. Will this recording be available? Will this webcast be available later? Yes, we're recording it. We will put it up later. I'll actually show you where it's going to be as well in a minute. Okay, so like I said, Bootstrap is basically a bunch of CSS, JavaScript, and some fonts, and it's open source. So you can go to GitHub and you can fork it. In fact, there's a bunch of people who have done that, as we'll see. And it was created by two guys who work at Twitter. I don't believe this is officially sanctioned by Twitter. I don't think it's a Twitter project that the company went after. It's just two guys who worked at Twitter who were awesome at design and decided to share their experience. Okay, so how do you get Bootstrap? There's basically two ways, and the choice really comes down to, are you working in Visual Studio? I know some of you are asking me about MVC4, so you must be. But if you're not working in MVC4, there's other ways to get it. So one way is to just go to getbootstrap.com. If you do the most natural thing and you type bootstrap.com, you'll end up at this sort of funky page, which has got to be one of the most requested unused pages around. So you want to go to Get Bootstrap, and you can just download either the source itself, which is the 3 elements that I talked about, CSS, fonts, and JavaScript, or you can download the source, and there's a lot more in there. All right, so let me do this one really quick, just to show you what we have. Okay, so in here there's a distribution folder, and you can just take these things. We've got some CSS, some fonts, and some JavaScript, and you can use them in your site. So what I want to do is just install this into a really basic site and just show you sort of the effect of it. So what we can do is we can just uncompress this here, just say extract these files here. We'll just copy and paste. Okay, so you'll notice that there's basically 2 files in here. There's a Bootstrap and a Bootstrap theme. So there's kind of like a basic plain version of the CSS, and then there's a more stylized version. You'll see that Bootstrap is themable. There's a bunch of themes you can get, and we can look at that in a little bit. And then there's, of course, the minified version of these as well. And then next to CSS, you've got the fonts, and the fonts have to be sort of in the same relative path to the CSS. And these are actually basically pictures. They used to have some PNG image maps before, but what they realized was you can have a black or white picture, or if you use fonts that look like pictures, then you can basically do coloring, scaling, all sorts of stuff that's much easier than with pictures. So these fonts are really for pictures, basically. And then we've got the JavaScript, which is just one JavaScript file. So if we want to put this into our site, I have a blank website here. Let me go over. You can see it's a basic website. There's no MVC action or any of that sort of fancy stuff. It's literally just HTML. I don't even think it has CSS. So let me open this up. And of course, it doesn't like if I don't say index.html. And you can see how this looks. So we got a little lorem ipsum and so on. Let me create another one. We'll just duplicate this tab rather. Okay, nope. So I'm going to leave one of these open so you can see how it looks before, and then we'll go put some Bootstrap in here and watch what happens. All right, so we've got a little H2, we've got a form, some buttons and so on, and we're going to be playing with this as we go, but let's go ahead and just install, quote, install Bootstrap. So we just go over here and we can just paste what we copied, I believe. Just paste it like this. So there's our CSS, our fonts, and JavaScript. You can put the JavaScript somewhere else. It doesn't depend on the location of the others, but the CSS and fonts have to be sort of next to each other, same relative paths, because the CSS files point at the fonts. So to install Bootstrap, we go like this, we go drag, let's put it in the head, drop, and then we've got our Bootstrap installed. Okay, well, actually, let's leave it like this since we might run it outside the site. Okay. Now, if I go back over here, let's see what happens when we do that. Nope, not too much yet. So we'll get in there. Now, there's a few things that we do in Bootstrap to sort of represent our page. So we can come down here and say we have a class equals container. Say it like this. And that will let us basically set up the grid system and do other things for sort of how you want these to lay out. Oh, I put this theme in there. That was wrong. Sorry about that. If you guys had your mics, you could say, hey, Michael, you did that wrong. There we go. That's more of a change. All right, you can see if I just switch back and forth here. Let me close this for a second. So here's the old one. You can see we've got new fonts, slightly greater line height. You can see the buttons look a little bit different. There's a little bit of margin on this. As I resize it, you'll see it actually changes more. It's Bootstrap 3, which is the current version, is basically what they it's using the design philosophy of basically mobile first. So they're designing so things look good on small screens and then scaling up rather than vice versa. So you can see if I did that before here, you know, there's definitely not as good. So just dropping that in there already did some good things. But you're going to see we can come back here and make this better. But we're off to a good start here. So installing it, as you can see, is super easy. No big deal there. Let's go look at what's contained in the other part we had here. So we have Bootstrap and we have Bootstrap source. Let's look at the Bootstrap source. So in here we have, this is the distribution that you saw, but you also have some examples, and more importantly, you have less. So we saw our CSS here is just as one big CSS file, which is like 7,000 lines of CSS, and of course in the minified version it's shrunken down, but it's still the same big monolithic CSS file. But that's not how the guys at Bootstrap work with it. They build off of these little things, right? These little less files. So here's normalized.less. That's the normalization stuff. Let's look at just progress bars. If I have to extract this, aren't I? Hold on. All right, excellent. So we can go in here to less, just grab one of these, like let's just say buttons. That's fine. So when you see the buttons dot less has got sort of these variables and stuff like that in there. So less is like CSS, but almost as a programming language where you can have these little mix-ins, you could have variables. So if you want to change the font weight across everything, you could just, you know, change this variable somewhere and it would just propagate across the whole system, okay? So you'll be able to see all those different pieces. Now, I believe this may be importing something here. Yeah, anyway, some stuff is undefined if we don't import it correctly. So they kind of build on each other, so you see there's some errors over here. But you can actually include this in Visual Studio and work with these directly, and this lets you sort of override and configure Bootstrap more easily than just working with a giant CSS file. Okay, so let's go back to my slides. So that's the way you get Bootstrap sort of from outside Visual Studio. If you're inside Visual Studio, if you're in a project, so let's switch over to another project for a moment. There's basically two really interesting ways to get it. And one of them is through NuGet. So I can come over here, and NuGet is the package management system for .NET. So we can come over here and we can type Bootstrap and go search for everything to do with Bootstrap. Okay. So here we've got the 302, and you can see this depends on jQuery 1.9 or greater, so whoever asked about that, apparently it does require the newer jQuery. And if I just hit install, I think we might want, which one do we want? Probably this one, okay. But notice there's also Bootstrap less source, so if you wanted to use the less instead of the CSS, then you could just go and install that one. So what this is going to do is going to download everything we need. You can see it making some changes over here. Put the CSS in the content folder right here. And over in the scripts, we've got Bootstrap. And somewhere we should have fonts right there. Okay, so we've got all those things laid out. That's looking good. And then, of course, we would just put them into our project. Just the same, of course, if it's MVC, you're going to go to your sort of shared layout. And at the top, you'll put your CSS, your Bootstrap, like so. And then maybe at the bottom below jQuery, this is important, you might put your script. Now, you only need your Bootstrap script if you're doing things that require the JavaScript components. So a lot of this stuff you can do with no JavaScript at all, so you could just leave that file out if you wanted. So here we have another sort of basic MVC layout. So this is the traditional web pages that you guys probably all have. All right, so here's, you can see it's got a slightly different font and stuff. The final way, really quickly, is in the new version of Visual Studio. In MVC 5, when you create one of these projects, it takes just a second for it to pull all the files together from all the different sources. But you may have seen down in the bottom there, it actually said adding Bootstrap just by me saying File New Project. The new MVC as well as ASP.NET Web Forms projects come with like the starting template being built on Bootstrap, and not just they include Bootstrap like they include jQuery, but it's like it really depends on it for how it looks and how it behaves. So we can get a little glimpse into that world here. So let's start up. So here you can see this big gray part, something we're going to talk about, these little grid sections, the stuff up here. If I make this smaller, you'll notice as it gets smaller, the menu goes away and you get this little cool drop-down menu, stuff like that. This is just File New Project in the new MVC. So MVC 5 is just completely brings that in for you. All right, so now you kind of know how to get started. Now what? What are we going to do? So if you want a more in-depth background on Bootstrap, Jason Diamond, one of my coworkers, recorded a really nice in-depth exploration of Bootstrap. Right, all the various pieces, how to work with less, all that kind of stuff. So you guys can watch that recorded video. I'm not going to really go into the exact details of the foundations of Bootstrap any more than I have. Okay. So what is Bootstrap? Now here are a bunch of different features which are pretty much independent of each other. Okay. Not 100%, but basically. And so Bootstrap has a grid system. It makes a bunch of changes to the typography to make things more readable as well as to normalize them. It's got some cool little highlighting if you have like inline code, not in the executable part of your app, but actually if you have, you're trying to show code, like if you're doing a blog and you're talking about programming and you want to say, and I use this code and something happened, there's ways to style that with Bootstrap. There's tables. Tables are a little bit passé in web design these days, but Bootstrap does a really nice job with them. And when you're truly working with tabular data, tables are great. They just sort of got a bad name because people were using them for grid systems and things that you shouldn't be doing. Okay, so if you want to learn about these things, we can come over here and go back to Get Bootstrap, not bootstrap.com, but getbootstrap.com. And you can go over here to the CSS or the components or the JavaScript, one of those three things, and you'll find all the stuff on that page, that slide I was showing you, you'll find it in here somewhere. So for example, if we go to overview and you want to talk about the typography, you can see here's the things that they do to make things slightly more readable. So they set the background color, they set the font base and the line height base to not be 1, to be something greater than 1, which makes it more readable. And it even tells you the less file. And see how this is red with this sort of monospace font? This is the code style. So if you go right click, inspect element, you can see it's angle bracket code, it's background color. All right. So when it says it has code sort of styling, that's what it's talking about. Okay. So We can go learn about how they work with tables, and it's got all the options. We'll see this more. We can go and do things like striped rows. Like people have traditionally done this with jQuery or with fancy selectors or whatever, but here you can just basically apply a class, right? If you want borders, if you want hover, so on this one, notice as I just do this, as it hovers over the elements, or just the data, not the head, it'll sort of highlight them. You could do that with jQuery or with your own CSS, or you could just add a table hover class to it. Okay, so you can sort of click around the CSS, the JavaScript, and components, and they've got nice documentation with examples of each of those. So what we're going to do for our webcast is we're going to go check out Developmentor's website. So develop.com, our website, most of you guys have probably been there given that you registered for this webcast. You may have noticed it looked significantly different a month ago than it does today. And that's because I redesigned it with Bootstrap. So there's many things that we did here to bring in the features of Bootstrap. And probably a good quarter of those features are visible as you just scroll through like develop.com's homepage or something like that, okay? So what I want to do is take you through each one of these and show you how you do it in Bootstrap and sort of how it fits together. So on the left here, we have our old version of the website, and on the right, that's the course page or sort of courses under the .NET topic. And notice you don't even actually see the content that we're trying to show you on the page on the left-hand version. And so we try to simplify, and apply some nice styles from Bootstrap while we're at it, okay? And if you're wondering how long all the design and stuff took, it was about 2 to 3 weeks. I'd say the web design part was probably 2 weeks worth of work just for me. Right? I was pretty much the only one doing that part of it. Okay, so the parts that we use at develop.com that we talk about, obviously the typography. Just by including the CSS, you're using the typography. You already look better, more readable, more uniform. Tables, forms, buttons, images, responsive utilities. That's the new MVC5 template I showed you. When you make it smaller and the menu kind of goes away and it becomes that drop down. That's part of something you can do with the responsive utilities. You can do a lot more though. I'll show you that. Glyph icons are the images, basically the little like icons and pictures and stuff we can use for representing icons on the site. Drop downs, nav bars, labels. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So let's go through it. So first of all, you may have noticed on the front page that we have these really big, bold, rounded little pieces that say, these are our courses by technology. And each one of these, I'll give you guys these slides later if you want. You click on them, it'll take you to the page that has this. So here on our courses page, you go here, it says we've got all these topics. And this used to be just like a bulleted list or something. It was totally boring, not inspiring. And so what we did is we applied labels from Bootstrap to basically make these much more sort of stand out and fun feeling and so on. So if we want to do that over in our little site, let's go back to our really basic site. Actually, I'll use my blank website. So if we want to do something like this, maybe I've got, let's have some spans on the page. It's kind of what those were. And let's say we're going to have, we had what, .NET, JavaScript, let's say Python, some MongoDB, etc., right? If you want to make these, well, let's look at how they look now. They're going to be dreadful, but that's on purpose. All right, remember, this is going to crash for a second. I got to go to index. There you go. Here they are. This is not super inspiring, and let me just zoom it for the sake of the webcast, right? Even being bigger, they're not much better. But what I can do is I can use the labels from Bootstrap. So let's go in here, and I'll use this sort of multi-edit thing. We'll say I want to add a class equals, whoops, and that only adds it at the bottom. Not enough help there. Okay. So to these, I want to add a class, and the class is just going to be label. Well, let me put one of those on there, and of course, this doesn't show up so well because it's white on white. So let's say what kind of label are we going to have? We could have a label info. We We could have a label default. We could have a label danger. It's like maybe a red or an orange. It's going to be red, I believe. And we could have a label, what else is success? It's a good one. It's like green or something. Now, one thing to notice here is there's sort of Bootstrap's design philosophy around CSS is to use a bunch of small classes rather than big CSS classes. So instead of just saying this is a successful label, we say give it all the label properties, right? Give it all the label properties and then add on additional properties about it. So let's look and see how that looks. Ooh, not exactly the same style we're using, but it's very, very close, okay? I mean, we did so little work, and this really looks good, I think, right? Already this looks really good. So I think we can even say label, only for buttons. For buttons, you can do something similar and make them bigger and smaller, but for labels, they're just one size. Okay, so hopefully you guys think that's pretty cool. We just applied some labels. All right, so at develop.com, we use this when we're talking about our courses, and I think that comes through really, really well. And you can see up here, all we did is say label warning, right? And we kind of customize the color a little bit for the different areas. But other than that, we basically just grab the styles that they have. The next thing to do is if we have a button, you can see on my home page here, I call it home page, this page with this save button. Let me add one more thing. There's a couple of things that are kind of not awesome here, but let's say have a hyperlink with an href that's not going to go anywhere, so we'll just say hash and say cancel, something like that. So notice these two things, they're not quite as cool as maybe if you're over here on the home page where we say, oh, enter your email to subscribe with this cool little hover effect and rounded borders and gradients and all that, or maybe this blue one at the bottom, or these orangish ones about registering for the webcast, like the one you're listening to right now. So, we can apply a button style just like we did with labels here to make those much, much nicer. All right, so let's go over here. Now, buttons, you would imagine a button would apply to a button, but it could also be an input of type submit. It could be an href. There's a couple of things it can go to, and very similar. We just say we have a class btn, and over here we're going to do something similar on our hyperlink. Now, maybe for the save one, we want to say this is a button where something good is going to happen. So we'll say success. And maybe on the cancel, we want to give them a little bit of warning. So this is going to be a button dash warning, if IntelliSense was more helpful. Okay, makes sense. So they're both buttons. One of them has the success status, and the other has the warning status. Let's look at that again. Ooh, already nice, huh? Better? Right, and notice this one is an actual button which submits the form. This is the hyperlink, which might just navigate away. Okay, so granted the form is still hideous looking. We need a little spacing here, but things are better. Now I personally think it's probably because I'm zoomed, I think those buttons are a little big. So what if we want to make them smaller? I could say btn-sm or LG if I wanted them to be larger than they are. So we can come over here and try that now, and they get a little smaller. They kind of fade away. They're not taking up so much space. Okay? So we use these buttons all over the place on our site. If you're going to the home page, we have the subscribe. You saw there's like 3 or 4 places. If you're on a course page, whoops, like over here, you can see right here we've got this request the online, request an on-site of this, and of course that just these are hyperlinks. They just navigate you away to a form, right? They're not actual buttons. Okay, so buttons, use them, love them. They're super easy. Class equals btn, and then what type of button, what size of button. Of course, if you want to know more about it, see some examples, just go to getbootstrap.com, buttons. I think it's either CSS or components, and then there's a whole bunch of examples and pictures. The other one we want to talk about is we kind of want to make our site more friendly, so we wanted to put faces in there. So if you go to our team up here, you can see these are all the people that work with us. So this is me if you want to know what I look like. I was teaching with Pierre earlier this week. If we go down here, Wally, the guy who asked the question earlier at the beginning, there's Wally, yes, very artistic question, Wally, nice. But notice how these guys all have circles for their pictures. And if you hover over them, they even get these cool little borders that exactly match the edge of the circle. They don't like highlight a square, but they actually highlight the circle. And if I click on Pure here, you can see I'm using a bigger picture of him here. But this is not a circular picture. I didn't do this in Photoshop or something like that. If I open up the picture itself, you can see he's actually square. So what did we do? Well, what we did is we applied a particular style from Bootstrap to say I want an image circle. Let me just grab Pure's URL here so we can put him on our home page that we're playing with, okay? So let me put him down here. Say some pics. All right, so let's put him here. And let's say we're going to have an image. Now I'm just going to set the style for the width because I think his picture is actually like 400 by 400. So let me just say 75 px just so it doesn't go crazy. The source equals this crazy thing here. Okay, so let's have 3 of these and go back to our, whoops, that was our little page we were designing. I gotta be careful to not, oh, actually, there's my original. Let me pull my original off so I can not mess it up. Okay, so let's refresh this. Now here's 3 peers. There's a couple of things we can do to him. You saw that we can set these image styles. So we just say class equals imj dash. We got 4 things. Circles, responsive, which does cool stuff based on the size, rounded, and thumbnail. So I'm going to use the 3 that have to do with like just shape, not the responsive component of it. So I'm going to do circle, rounded, so you'll see the difference between those, and then what is it, the other one? It used to be called Polaroid, because it looks like it's kind of one of those traditional pictures you take, the old type where you got to like let it sort of set for a minute and the color will sort of come in and so on. But now they just call it thumbnail. So if we apply those 3 things to him, you can see we got the round one. That's from like what we're doing on our site. We've got the rounded edges here, so it sort of matches more nicely with like the buttons and labels. And then you've got, it's a little hard to see, but you got this sort of border here that looks like he's in a picture frame or something. And if I did something like this and set the background color of my container, background hash AAA, something like that, you can see the borders a little more clearly here, okay? All right, so if you got to work with images, really nice stuff. Let's go back here. So we make big use of that for this. And notice like when we had the hover effect, like here you can see the little line that goes around. It actually goes to the border of the visual element, not the actual element. All right, another thing we wanted to do is make a really big and bold statement when you landed on our home page. So here, what do? I think if you go to our homepage, you're going to find out what we do pretty quickly, right? And this sort of giant call to action is very common in Bootstrap sites, and they're called jumbotrons. They used to be called hero units. Now they're called jumbotrons. Okay, so like if you go to our site, first thing you're going to see is that giant jumbotron here. So let's look at how you define one of those. It's really pretty easy. You say I have a jumbotron, and then you put stuff in it, okay? So just by putting this class jumbotron, a lot of stuff sort of pops out and things behave differently. And then here we can have, this is our mission statement, and then this is our picture of MacBook Pro running Visual Studio. And then notice this class, visible SM, visible XS, we'll come back to that, okay? So these jumbotrons are really nice. If you look over at the Get Bootstrap here, I believe it's under Components. Jumbotron, okay, there it is. Look, this is a more typical looking one, where it's sort of got the gray border. You saw that in the ASP.NET site when somebody created it. When we created the new one, it's kind of got like a hello ASP.NET. There's that grayed out big section. That was a jumbotron. I see there's a question. Let me see. Will this be recorded? Yes, it will be. HTML action link. We cannot provide the fonts welcome their text. Okay, we cannot provide the fonts icon in the text which always goes out, so we got to use the URL this way. You can, so I guess the question is, you're having problems using HTML action link to put on some of these things like, yeah, where do we have it? Here maybe, this kind of stuff. I believe you can actually pass an HTML options or attributes, and you could put this in there, but I'm not entirely sure. I'll just do it this way if it's going to be a problem. Okay, so let's keep going. So these are really easy to do. You just basically say Jumbotron. They typically go at the top. There's a cool website called builtwithbootstrap.com, and these are examples of websites that are, as you might expect, built with Bootstrap. Okay, and you can submit your site in here if you've done this, if you built this. But a lot of these, you can sort of see they have this Jumbotron thing. So this Watt score right here, this thing is your Jumbotron, and let's see, let's find out. Maybe not exactly, but they sort of took inspiration from it. Let's go back here. So anyway, you can browse through these sites if these are interesting for you. Some of them are good, some of them are not. Right. Bootstrap used to have a gallery, and I think they still do, but they moved it from here. So it might be a gallery under here. I can't remember. It used to be right on the home page, but then they moved it. Yeah, anyway, doesn't matter. It used to be right at the bottom here. They had a nice little gallery. Oh, examples. There it is. Sorry. So let's go look at the ones that they're showing. They've got some nice ones. So here's those. No, this is just the built-in one. Sorry. But there's a lot of nice sites built with them, and they typically have this Jumbotron thing going on. Okay. Don't have to, but they can. Another really nice thing is block quotes. So if you look on our homepage, you'll see we have these little customer quotes, like one about Brock Allen, who was in that picture I showed you a little while ago. It says he's really good, and this is why we like him. And notice all of this design with this little pull left, this insert, the typography changes, the dash, the color down here, all of this stuff is just from saying here's a block quote, and then at the bottom we have a small citation. The little dash, all of this stuff is just pure Bootstrap. So if you want to have these types of quotes for whatever reason, maybe you want to call out a piece of text in a blog, or you want to feature a customer comment like we are, just say block quote and put stuff in it, and then boom, you're off to the races. Really, really easy. Pure Bootstrap CSS. Let's see, another question or comment. Bootswatch. Bootswatch. I think this is also interesting, but not what I was looking for. But let's check it out. Bootswatch.com. Free themes for Bootstrap. So yeah, this is really cool. Well, these are the themes that I was sort of talking about before. You can get these themes and you can go through them. Here's some nice themes, and you can just throw these on top and everything sort of changes. But this is also not examples. This is like get your themes. This is really nice, but not exactly the same thing. Okay. So block quote, really nice. I didn't mean to open it, sorry. Sure, that makes your screen flicker. Okay, so something that most websites need, and they can be very tricky, are forms. So you saw the form on our site was looking really shabby. It was not at all inspired. Okay, so what we'll see is Bootstrap has some really great stuff for it. And when I say our site, I mean this thing right here, this older one. This is really an ugly. This looks like it comes from Mozilla in 1995 or something like that, right? Whereas, so here's our current one. Let me refresh this. It's looking better around it, but our stuff is still bad. As opposed to, like, if you go here and you put it in your email address, the stuff's kind of rounded, and it does this little glow effect as you fade in and fade out, and just really nice and feels good. We have this in other places where there's more input. So over here, you really know where your cursor is, right? Because it's blue and so on. Different little drop downs. So we want to make our things look like this using Bootstrap. So we can do that. We just go over here, wherever I put my form. Here's the form. So I want to put it like this. And these are little, there's a few moving pieces for these. I can say class. Actually, sorry, let me look over here really quick. Yeah, so we need to put these little pieces into a div class called form group. All right, and then I should probably put my piece into a label. We're not going to need our BRs anymore. So this part I want in a span here, and I want to say this class is a form label. Form label, is that not in here? Oh, I think that was actually just from our customizing the site, sorry. But this one, we definitely want to say class equals form control, okay? So that alone, plus the form group, will sort of fix up our site here. So let's do that for email as well. Let's say email, and this is going to be you at your domain. We don't think we need our BRs anymore. And let's go ahead and put our buttons in a form group as well. Okay. So let's refresh it and see how close we came. None of those. Ready, set, go. All right. So one thing to notice here is, first of all, there's a lot of nice space. Remember how this was crammed in there and these look really old school? Well, now they look pretty good if, it's kind of a big if, they look pretty good like this. If I'm on basically a phone, they look perfect. However, if I'm on a big site, they don't look so good. So you can basically, the default is to take up the whole part. So you can say these are form inline. No, that's not helping. Might be for the group. Anyway, we can override the styles to make them not so big. Okay, maybe the form inline goes on the group actually, but I don't want to mess with it, right? So you can change them so they're not so big, but basically they're already looking much better by adding just form control to them. Okay, still a little more styling to do, but getting there. Okay, so what's next? Next one is tables. So we have a lot of tables on our site that we wanted to redesign. For example, if you go to our classes that you can take, you can see here's a bunch of different classes and they're in these groups. And this really is tabular data. So why not put it into a table? So what we ended up doing is just basically putting in tables and applying a few basic styles to them. So you come over here and you can just say, I've got a table, so that just sort of turns on the other things that you can do to it. It doesn't do very much. You can say it's striped, so that gives us the alternating colors here. And then we wanted to override the colors of the striping and the header. So we said course list. So I can say table.courseList and do some additional color management and some more font stuff. But sort of this highlighting and alternating colors and stuff is just table striped. It's very, very nice. Okay, another thing that is good is kind of like the Jumbotrons. However, they're not as big and they're not as bold. So we can use these things called wells, which are more like smaller pieces of the site. So I see there's a question. Let me see what that is before I move on. Okay, the Bootstrap gallery is behind Expo now. Okay, thanks, Christian. That's awesome. Extra, there we go. All right, so expo.getBootstrap. Thanks. So I'll pull that up in a little bit. Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you. Okay, so these wells are pretty cool. So if you look over here on that course page again, we want to sort of put this little call out at the top. So we put this well in here. We have some other places that we're using it. Like if you go to where our locations are, you can see we use the wells to sort of hold each different location. All right. So in order to do that, that's really, really easy. All I have to do is like maybe in this first part here, we'll say div this well conveys is for special info. Okay. Now, if I go to my site, which is here, and I refresh it, somewhere it says this well is for special info. Well, that doesn't stand out very well. So I can just go like this. I could just say this div is a well, class equals well, and boom, there it goes. Now you might want a new line there in the pictures or something like that, right? So it's, we'd probably do this with CSS, but just for now, maybe we'll say something like style, text align, center, just for a moment, right? You put that in CSS, but here you can kind of call this out, okay? It's a nice border. You can override all those things, but a very good start. Let's see, another question or comment? Well, Bootstrap, does it work in IE8? Good question. Let's find out. So the question is, does Bootstrap table striping work in IE8? Let's go down here and say H2. This is a table. It's a table. Let's just say it's some rows. TD. This is a row. All right. So down at the bottom, this does not even look like a table, does it? Apparently it is a table because it says so. Let's do the table striping. So we'll say class equals table. Now let's see what that does to it. Okay, so now it kind of puts some lines in for each row. That's a little better. It's more spacing. If you want just a basic plain one, we can say table bordered. There you go. Now it has a border around all of its pieces. You might not want that, but you might. Now, the question was specifically about the hover. So, oh no, it was about striping. So say table striped. Thank you, Pierre. Thanks for letting me borrow your picture. All right, so now you can see that I did the striped stuff here. Automatically does that. So the question was, does this work in IE? Well, let's find out. So let's go open up IE. I have IE 11. I'm pretty sure it's going to work in IE 11. Let's find out. I know that's not the question. So if I scroll down, here's our table. It looks great in IE 11. But if I go to F12 tools, the dev tools, I should somewhere be able to switch. Let's see, Document Explorer, gears. One of these should let me change. I'm not used to the new dev tools. It's network, it's responsiveness, profiler. This might be, okay, here we go. Browser profile this. We don't want edge mode. We want, let's try it with IE9 first, okay. Let's see, does it look good? Do I need to reload it? Let's find out. It still works with IE9. Let's go to IE8. So it does not work in IE8. As you can see, if I switch from IE9, here it is. If I switch to IE8, not so much. So I'm guessing the answer is yes to your question, does it use CSS3? So for an ASP. There's a question for an ASP.NET MVC4 Plus application. What do we need to add to our project in order to work with the less files? That is a good question. I believe in the newer versions of Visual Studio, this is just built in. I could just go add new item, less. There. Yeah, so this is just built in. I think you have to expose it as a bundle. You can't just include the less file directly, but I believe if you bundle the less file, it will then become a CSS file. But that I haven't tried it. That's my speculation, but I think that's what you need to do. Okay. All right, let's go back to my slides here that I got some more things. So wells, one single class on an outer div. How could it get easier? And it really makes a big difference. It's very nice. Okay. There's some more interactive stuff that is really neat that we can look at, and this is the first one that I can think of that really requires the JavaScript. Okay, so one of the challenges, let me just go here, one of the challenges we had was we wanted to be able to not just have a combo box of dates and locations for our classes, but these kind of cool pictures with the location. So you click here, you see a palm tree and mountains, it's Los Angeles, right? Or Big Ben in London, or something like that, right? The problem was, if we have a whole bunch of upcoming dates way into the future, well, we can't like dedicate the whole page to just a bunch of little thumbnails. That would be ridiculous. So we don't show them. But we still would like people to know and potentially register for a class 6 months out or something like that, right? So we added this little thing here, see all dates. And if you hit this, probably can't appreciate it very much in GoToMeeting, but this swoops down, the background fades out, and there's this nice dialogue with all of our upcoming classes, like all the way out to the end of next year. If I click over here or here or here, it will close the dialogue and it reverses and fades away. Okay. So these types of dialogues are really easy to use. Over here in the webcast section, somebody asked if this will be recorded. Develop.com/webcast, wait 1 day. But same thing for the webcast. You can click here and see all the upcoming ones. We're having one on SQL Server that apparently doesn't show up yet. Okay. So interesting things happen. So let me go back to this one with this dialogue. So here, notice it's kind of hard to see if I move this out of your way. Not easily, I guess. Come on, move. See the scroll bar. Normally I scroll this whole page here, but when I hit the dialogue, it puts sort of a temporary upper one. So if the dialogue needs to scroll, it can, but it doesn't move the page behind it. So that's kind of a nice little trick that they do for us as well. In order to do this, it's got a lot of moving parts, but it's super easy, okay? So what you need to do is drag in something like this. And there, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts. So just copy and paste from the example at Bootstrap. So this is us, so forget that. But you have a class, modal fade, role is dialogue. And within it, it has the actual dialogue that's going to show up, modal dialogue. And then within the dialogue, it has modal content. And within the content, it has 3 pieces, a header, a modal header, a modal footer, and a modal body. And then we have a button, which we want to close. So we say data-dismiss the modal. All right. And at the bottom, we have that green button we want to close. So we have a data-dismiss modal. And I want it to look like a cool little green button. So I said class BTN success. Make sense? Question? Web Essentials for less. Yeah, there you go. Web Essentials is good. Have you worked with Zurb Foundation? Pros and cons of using one over the other. I have not used Zurb, so that's another front-end framework, I'm guessing. No, I haven't. And there's also stuff that's built on Bootstrap, so it's almost not even a trade-off. It's like in addition. So, for example, UI kit, for example. So if you go look at UI kit here, this is a really nice framework with some examples and stuff. Do they have some pictures or something here? Actually, I think they might have if I bothered to scroll down. No, not really. But this is built on top of Bootstrap. So there's a lot of things that use Bootstrap as foundations as well. So yeah, pretty cool. Will the slide deck be shared? Sure. I'll put it up on when you go here to the webcast. When you go to one of these recorded ones, you'll see there'll be a little video player, an HTML5 player, but at the bottom there'll be downloads. It'll just say slides or something like that. It'll be right there. Yes. Okay, back to our slides. So this one, this one's kind of a lot, but it's not hard. You just have to get it all to line up right, okay? And then in order to make it go, we've got, if somebody clicks on this here, all right, upcoming classes dialog, that's just for us. Oh, sorry, this is the link up here. So we say on our link, among other things, we have to put 2 pieces of information. Data-toggle modal tells it it's going to open a dialog, tells Bootstrap it's going to open a dialog. And then you say, what is it? And you basically put the CSS selector there. So you say hash upcoming classes dialog. And it goes and looks over here and it says, okay, I'm going to find the dialog with the ID of upcoming classes dialog. All right. So there's a lot of CSS and HTML there, but it's always the same. Just copy and paste it. It's nice and easy to use. Another thing that we did a lot of is at the top you have our little bar, right? You saw that navigation bar, and this is all from Bootstrap as well. So you just say nav, classes, nav bar. We want ours black and not gray, light gray or something, so we said nav inverse. And then inside the nav bar, you can put things like a brand. So in the top left, we have the little airplane and the developmentor. That's the brand. And then we've got all of our options in here. And then we have a drop-down menu as well within there. So we say class equals drop-down. Okay. And then under the drop-down, we've got a message that just says click here for more. Let me go ahead and do that for you. Go over to develop.com. It says click here for more. That's the more. And notice this little down arrow roundy thing. You click it, it comes down. Okay. So that's this link. And then here's more. And then here we're saying glyph icon. This is the images. And we're saying glyph icon circle arrow down. So that's a little down arrow. And this is just one of those fonts that stands in for an image. And then once you click that, here's the actual drop down that we're opening, this drop down menu. Okay. So one of the last things, we have just a few minutes left, one of the last things I want to show you is something that's really cool, is these responsive utilities. And that's what they were using on the ASP.NET MVC website. So if I pull our site off here, and let me unmaximize it, but basically make it full size. So, whoops, go back. It doesn't really matter where we are. So notice here we have contact, team, webcast, search, courses, online classes, and classroom classes. Now that's all good if you've got a big monitor, but if you've got a small monitor, well, do you want that to like make the entire page scroll to the right, or worse, if it wraps? Oh my gosh, if there's like 2 levels of blackness at the top, that would be bad. So what we can do is we can use these classes. And what we can do is we can put these either hidden or visible elements onto things. So for example, let me go back. So for example, we can say we want something hidden on small screens. Right? So for example, it's cool that you can see our team and our webcast and stuff, but if you don't have room, we'd rather you find our classes. So as this gets smaller, notice, eventually some of them will pop away. And the way we did that is we just, on those menu items, applied class of, visible on, hidden on small, hidden on extra small. Right? As we make it smaller, we have like a hidden on extra small for even more of them. And eventually it just becomes this little hamburger menu, just like Chrome has. Okay. So in order to do that, this little trick, here's our menu list, our menu items. These are hyperlinks, right? We just say this is hidden on small, this is hidden on small, this is hidden on small, and it's hidden on medium as well, because we're already out of space. So very easy to do, very nice little trick, and all you got to do is just put a little bit of CSS in there. All right, so I see there's one more question. Let's open that up. If you go back a few slides where you had the menu, where you had the icon, did you do that with Action Link? Let's see. This one here. Did I do this with Action Link? No, but I could have. Let me just see if I can show you what I'm talking about here. Let's go to my MVC5 site. So I think the question is basically, how do you get like the data dash and stuff like that in there? Although data dash, that may be tricky. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure if I can do that with Action Link. I could put the class and the styles, but the data dash, I don't think that it will show up there correctly. There might be some convention that MVC uses for allowing you to put data dash, but yeah, I'm not sure if I can do it. We can stick around at the end and I'll play with it if you like, okay? All right, so pretty straightforward, right? So overall, I spent about 3 weeks working with Bootstrap, redesigning our site, doing a bunch of custom CSS. We've still got quite a bit, but I pretty much took the old site and just threw away all of the CSS and all of the styles, applied a bunch of Bootstrap stuff to see how good I could get it looking out of the box, and then I started trying to go, creating our own little styles, our own things, and I'm not sure how much we ended up with, but quite a bit of CSS, but not nearly as much work as we would have needed. Okay, so one thing I did want to pass along is some regrets. I wish I would have used less for our CSS from Visual Studio and just worked with less instead of starting from the big monolithic CSS, both for our own stuff as well as for working with Bootstraps less. So it's easier to override some of the Bootstrap values and stuff that way instead of being more forceful with some heavy-handed CSS pieces. And then I wish I would have known about the responsive utilities earlier. One more thing on the responsive utilities that's kind of cool here. If we go here, let me pull that off. So the menu is pretty obvious, but so we say hide these things when it gets too small. But one of the other problems is this section right here. That's really wide and it doesn't wrap well, and it causes a big problem on like iPads and stuff. It's still not perfect on iPad, but this was like a really big problem on tablets and phones. So if you look in here, there's actually, eventually, somewhere, there's this. There's a div which is only visible on small and extra small devices. And what it will do is if it's present, it will actually put a line break between these. So as I make this smaller, see, you can see it already. There, like this size, it looks like this, but if it gets a little smaller, this responsive piece pulls that line break in and then throws it in here, so then it lines up a little better. It's not really great for small screens, but that was a big problem. So that was something that was just crazy easy to do. Just put a div with a show it on only small screens, and that'll do the line break, right? Or a BR or whatever you want to work with. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, so now you guys know more about Bootstrap. It's basically the designer, the web designer that you always wish you had to help you write these programs, right? These websites. Traditionally we start from something that looks like this. Let me find the one that I pulled over to the side. That's not it. Sorry, one second. Oh, here it is. This horrible looking website. This is where people typically start when they get new websites. There's just no design, nothing. And notice in just a few little bits of work, we were able to get it to look like this. Let me shrink it down again. Okay, whoops. Right, we've got these cool little highlighted pieces. We've got nice looking forms. We've got some great button interaction. We've got little call outs. We didn't do a hero or a jumbotron. That used to be called heroes. We've got these nice tables. We could do hover effects. So if you compare that to that, I think we've come a long ways, and we've done very, very, very little design work. Okay, so it's a designer you always wish you had, and you basically start from a good-looking website and then go up, rather than starting from a really horrible website and then hopefully make your way towards something better, right? So it's nice to start from a high point and just keep going rather than go up. So we talked about installing Bootstrap. You can get Bootstrap or just do it via NuGet. It's got a bunch of layouts. We didn't really talk about grids. We did talk a lot about the styles and some of these behaviors, which are sort of working with the JavaScript and jQuery components of Data-Dash. Right, so you saw how we did this at develop.com. We're super happy with how things came out. It was really fun to work with Bootstrap, and I think it looks pretty good, especially that I don't have much of a design background. So the final thing I guess we could look at is expo.getbootstrap.com is one. All right, so here's some examples. Thank you, Christian, for pointing that out. Like here you can clearly see the jumbotron on this one, right? But really, really nice and easy. Nice horizontal design. Let's see, is this actually a jumbotron or is it just a big piece? No, just a big piece. But nonetheless, same basic idea. All right, so if you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. Otherwise, if you want to contact me, you can do that through here. There was the questions about, will this webcast be recorded? Will there be the slides for download, the examples for download? Yes, they will all be at develop.com/webcasts, and you'll find it there.